Okay, guys, I just took this bleed ritualist into the Arbiter of Ash T0, and I am shocked at how much damage this build is doing currently. I basically went right into maps, went right into T15, scaled this thing right into the Arbiter, and just took him out like a true assassin. And it is time to share this build with all of you. I'm not done yet. I'm going to continue working on it, but let's dive right into it. So looking at gear right off the bat, we've got the deepest tower on our head. Now, I will say that this is a big deal. This is a big piece of gear here. Big hat, doing big damage. So basically, enemies in your presence are counted as being on low life. And then if we go over here to Rake, our 5 link here is Execute, doing 50% more damage with hits against enemies that are on low life. Yes, this is big. However, I will say that this hat is not required to do big bleed damage on this Ritualist. This is something I added literally right before the Arbiter. Previous to that, I was doing T15 bosses, and a bleed crit with Rake was taking them down to 0 guaranteed. So the next thing we'll notice here on the gear sheet here, Venopuncture ×3. Again, this isn't necessarily required. I've got an iron ring here. This is a pretty, T7 roll on the physical damage, so nothing too special. And if we put this on, you can see our 6880 here on damage on the sheet. It actually goes up the use for the Rake. So why would we run Venopuncture? Well, it's because of that increased magnitude of bleeding you inflict. Really, there's a balance here with Rake where you can see we're taking deep cuts where you get 75% more magnitude of bleeding. However, you're dealing 25 less damage with hits. So with bleed, it does scale off of that hit, right? That physical damage that comes into the enemy prior to armor, by the way. So the armor calculation is not accounted for in the bleed calculation. Now we're at 7,129 bleed damage per second according to this tooltip. Path of Building will tell you much higher. Now, if we replace this with an iron ring, we go down to 6,468. Although our damage per use goes up, I don't like to see this number go down by that much. And I did enjoy seeing it go up as we started stacking these Venopunctures. So I would say that these are more required than the helm we've got. But it's not absolutely required. So being that that's all of the unique gear that we have on, this is a pretty big bleed build that I would say is solo self-found viable. Leading into this, I was running the iron rings. You can see I've got a rare spear on. I don't have the Tangle Tongue on. This is what I had on when I hit the Arbiter in the showcase. Now let's just talk about Tangle Tongue Forked Spear here. This is a great option, especially once you get into maps and the early mapping experience. This will carry you quite far due to that fork on critical hits and just how much you're critting with this thing. So on this tooltip, it gives us a main hand effective critical hit chance of 80% due to the forking, and then an effective chance for a twice critical hit at 30%, which is pretty damn big damage here. We've got 390% critical damage bonus with our setup right now. However, once you get a spear, and this spear here would be worth something like 1 exalt or so. It's nothing special. Again, it's pretty good. It's got a T8 roll on physical damage. It's got that percent to critical hit chance. And then it's got a flat damage roll here as well. And this pretty good spear, I like to wear more than Tangle Tongue because it's a more smooth damage experience throughout the entire map. Now, optionally, you could carry both with you and swap out to Tangle Tongue if you want to try for that big twice critical damage bonus hit on a boss like the Arbiter and just watch the health just obliterate the health pool. But again, you saw the bleed damage that came out with this spear on this build. Ultimately, I'm looking to upgrade this spear with a better rare rather than continue with the Tangled Tongue, and we'll go from there. For the rest of the gear, your gearing experience for this build is essentially trying to get double resistance rolls on most of your pieces so that you don't have to rely on your rings for resistances. That's key. And you, of course, it's getting enough of the defensive stats on your gear so that you're able to run the venopunctures and benefit from the unfurled finger and the mystic attunement from the ritualist ascension. So I will say that we are pretty much a glass cannon at this point. We went into the Arbiter with less than 2,000 health. Leading into the Arbiter, I did die a couple times to the Count Citadel boss, which was interesting. I mean, literally one shot. So there's a balance here where you really need to focus on picking up that life and other defenses, because you can overextend on your offense with this build trying to scale that bleed. It is somewhat of a trap, but I mean, it just depends on your preference and your skill and your how comfortable you are with the build in the higher end content. How fast you move out of the defensive stats on your rings and into the offensive. Having died a couple times to the Count, I'll probably scale this back or try to figure out and shore up my life and other defenses. But here you can see on my gloves, went with that critical damage bonus and then the physical damage to attacks. And then we've got the Magnitude Wolf Talisman here for that magnitude of bleeding. So again, leaning more on the offensive, where I may want to dial that back a notch and tune that as I continue through that leveling process. With regard to the venopuncture, there is a drawback where you get increased chill magnitude when you're bleeding. So we use that staunching charm. And for endgame right now, light stunning seems to be an issue with this build, especially when you're laying down your spear field. So getting 3 slots here on your belt and then stacking with the stun charms here would be something I'm looking into. I really want to shore that up because getting light stunned constantly really sucks. So that's pretty much the gear. Regarding the helm, we did have the Smiling Knight cowled helm in the leveling process and into early maps. I ended up dropping this. The aggravate chance here really is kind of overrated. Most enemies are moving. And with bosses that are more stationary, you have Bloodhound's Mark, which is stunning. And during that stun animation, the boss is kind of staggering back. That's movement, that's aggravation. There are other ways to get aggravation. And in the tree, we do have perfectly placed knife, which gives us that 20% chance to aggravate on critical hits, which is nice. But overall, I'm not too concerned with aggravate, even though it is a big damage increase. It happens, and when it does, you notice, and it's good, but I would not waste your head slot here for aggravate. If you don't have the deepest tower, it is an option. Otherwise, just a helm to shore up those defenses is pretty strong as well. This is what I was running right before the Arbiter, and we were doing well without this helm. And then we've already talked about Tangled Tongue, so let's move on. Oh, the rings. I'm not sure if, yeah, we went over the rings. Iron rings are just as good if you get decent rolls. And then breach rings. For an endgame activity, breach is pretty strong for the Ritualist for obvious reasons. Farming the quality and also getting that chance at a breach ring. If you get a breach ring with a really high physical damage roll and you're able to quality that up to 40%, it is definitely stronger than venopuncture. So something to look for towards the late end game. So let's move on to skills here. So up front, we've got Rake. We did pick up our 5 link here, and we did talk about Execute. Leading into that, we've got the deep cuts, which we've mentioned, and then heavy swing. We don't really care about the 10% less attack speed because really we're going in at a distance and one big hit and then disengage and then repeat the process. So we're not spamming. We don't really care about the attack speed. Momentum, coming in at a distance to get that 40% more damage, and then concentrated effect is big damage increase as well. And then if we just look at Rake, just a reminder that it does deal up to 100% more damage based on distance traveled. It is 100% bleeding on hit. And then with the quality, you're getting even more damage based on distance traveled. So coming in at a distance, disengage, that's the key here. You're not spamming this. You're not, fighting face to face. This is definitely stock and pounce type of play style. Let's move on to Spear Field because this is very important. This is helping us with our wave clear. We lay this down. We're maiming everything on the screen basically. Martial tempo to lay it down faster, and then rage. We are at basically maximum rage all the time with this build. And then when you're on bosses, it's nice to lay down Spear Field and to pick up that rage as well. And then we've got Pin in order to get our Frenzy charges with Combat Frenzy, with Profusion here. And this is to empower our Lightning Spear, and we're blowing up screens as well. So not only is this doing big boss bleed damage, this is blowing up the screen. We do have a little bit of a setup with Spear Field, but the clear on this is really good. I'm doing well in Delirium, doing pretty good in Breach. I would say it's not S tier wave clear, but it's pretty damn good and it's fun. To help with that wave clear, we've got Herald of Blood with Hamel Crystals, Magnified Effect, and then Deadly Herald. So we're getting those bloody explosions, which are pretty nice. Wind Dancer for the defensives with Maim, Blind, and Cannibalism. And then on Combat Frenzy, we are running Precision and Vitality, so we do have extra Spirit, and we're using these Spirit supports to help out with our defenses. And then Blood Hunt is our finisher. We've got Inevitable Critical and Pinpoint Critical to try to ensure that when we do Blood Hunt, that we're critting as much as possible. And then we've got Brutality. If we're not running the deepest tower, then we would switch Execute with Brutality, and Rake would still get a 25% more physical damage versus the 50 here. And then Blood Hunt would benefit when you use it on enemies that are below 35%, which is pretty typical, and then they just die. So that is basically the kit here. Lightning Spear we didn't really go over, but Vault, Fork, and then Conduction. We are dual purpose here. We're clearing the screen with Lightning Spear, and then on bosses, we're getting that improved shock on the boss in order to buff our big Rake hit for that big bleed damage. Moving on to passives. So here we go into Unfurled Finger. We get the reduced mana, which is not a big issue, and then Mystic Attunement for obvious reasons we've already discussed. Pumping the Veno punctures and other rings that you're wearing, plus your amulet. Early on during the leveling process, we did use Corrupted Life Force, but in the end game, favoring the more defensive option, Wildwood Persistence, which I find pretty nice. And then for our final ascendancy, I might even look at Charm charges because the devs are making changes here and things are starting to improve. Versus the Corrupted Life Force, which I just don't see as very beneficial in the end game. We're blowing the screen up before this can really help us. So the passives, if you've been following along with the starter guide, one of the big changes here is that we respect out of these nodes here. We did lean into Stalk and Leap, and we are empowering that Rake for that big bleed damage with our projectiles every 8 seconds, throwing a Lightning Spear in order to get even more damage on the Rake. We got the same here, more melee damage with the projectile, but In the end, I wanted to travel out and pick up other things, so we got rid of it and just traveled with the small nodes here. And then we'll bring up the anointment right now, Lay Siege. So we did pick up Glancing Blows, and this gives us the 75% block chance, and then this gives us 75% increased damage because of that. And the anointment here is actually pretty cheap. It goes up to Fear, no higher than Fear, which is a pretty good option for both solo self-found and trade. It's not too expensive, and it's not too difficult to farm up to this tier. So regarding the rest of the passive tree, one thing to really note is that we do go over and pick up the ailment wheels that buff both our bleeding and our shock. So wasting, fast-acting toxins, and deterioration. Rather than pick up the bleed nodes, like the incision ones are what I want to really bring up. I got out of the incision because of the way you reset the stacks of incision constantly with your chance to bleed. We currently have like almost a 50% chance to bleed on any attack, and then 100% on our rake. So we're never stacking up to the 10%. We're not getting the full benefit of 1,000 cuts. However, you see that you do get the increased magnitude of bleeding by any enemy effective with an incision. And with this build, you will essentially have one stack of incision all the time, at least one stack. So it is a way to add yet more magnitude on your bleeding. However, with an investment of around 8 to 9 passive points here, I decided to give that up and get more crit bonus and crit chance, and to ensure that we could get both enhanced reflexes and bestial skin as well. And then also escalating mayhem may be on the table with regard to 1,000 cuts, and I believe that this is just better. We're using Spearfield quite often, and we're getting a big damage bonus. And again, it's buffing the rake. Almost everything about this build, everything you do between Spearfield, Lightning Spear, the passive trees, everything is buffing the rake hit and the rake bleed. So this build is on Mobalytics. I've got the link in the description of the video so you can follow along. It goes into great detail, both for the starter version and the endgame version, so that you can take this from the campaign all the way into the Arbiter, just as I have. If you enjoy this content and you like this build, please do like and subscribe. I'm going to continue working on this build, and I've got others in the wings, and I hope to see you next time.